They searched her box before they let her take off her wet cloak. Verity Nash stood in the great cold hall of Barrowmere, with snow melting off her hem into a dark ring on the flagstones, and watched a footman turn her few possessions out onto a side table in front of the physician, the housekeeper, and a staring scullery maid. Her comb, 2 mended shifts, her father's little brass mortar, worn bright at the lip, a folded letter she would rather no one read. The footman lifted each thing, examined it, set it down, while the woman with the ring of keys looked on with her arms folded and her mouth set. The last one stole a snuff box and a length of the late Countess's lace. The woman said, to the room rather than to Verity, as though the accused were not yet worth addressing directly. So we look now, before, and not after. You'll not take offense at it, if you're honest. Her eyes came up at last, hard and gray as ledger slate. I am Mrs. Harlow. I keep this house and have these 20 years. Are you honest? The maid stifled a laugh. The physician turned his signet ring on his finger and did not intervene. Verity had learned at 15, standing at her father's grave in borrowed gloves, that there is a way to be humiliated that leaves the humiliation with the other person. She had practiced it in a dozen houses since. She lifted her chin no higher than dignity required, folded her chapped red hands in front of her, and let the silence do the work until the footman, embarrassed, began putting her things clumsily back. I am honest, she said, when the box was closed. I am also cold, madam. Where is my patient? Up a staircase, the width of a farm cart, past the pale accusing faces of ancestors in oil. One of them, she noticed, turned half to the wall so that only its gilt frame showed. They brought her into a room thick with heat and gloom, and the low laboring rasp of a man breathing very badly. The Earl of Farne lay in a bed built for a giant. He had been a giant once. The ruin of it was still there in the long bones of him. Now the flesh hung off those bones like wet sail off a spar, and his eyes, when they found her out of the shadows, were the sunk gray of the winter sea below his own cliffs. Another one, he said, and the contempt was so exact, so practiced, that some tired corner of her almost admired the craft of it. How long do they give me this time? A week? I have outlived 4 physicians and 3 of your sisterhood. I'll not be easy to bury. Verity crossed to him. She did not sink into the deep curtsy the room expected. A nurse who grovels is a nurse they decide they can send away. She lifted the candle from the stand and, before Mrs. Harlow could think to stop her, brought the flame down low and close to the old man's hand, where it lay slack on the coverlet. She saw it in half a breath, and wished to God she had not. Across each fingernail ran a pale band, ridged, bloodless, level as a tide line drawn on sand. His lips were split at the corners, and under the sick room's mustiness, on the air of his breath when he spoke, there it was, a thin, unmistakable reek of garlic and hot metal both at once. She had met those 3 signs together once before in her life. She had been 13, at her father's elbow, in a rich man's bedchamber in Newcastle. She remembered every word her father had said that day. She remembered, better, what the world had said to him after. When it broke him for saying it, the man was not dying of any fever. He was being poisoned slowly by a patient hand. And every road out of Barrowmere, in the snow, without wages or character, ran straight through the woman downstairs who held every key in the house. Well, said Mrs. Harlow from the doorway, and her keys chimed once as she shifted her weight. Verity set the candle down with a hand that did not tremble because she had spent 15 years teaching it not to. "He is gravely ill," she said. "I will sit up with him tonight." She did not sleep. She sat in the hard chair drawn close to the fire, watched the labor of the old man's chest, and let herself go back, because going back was the only way to be certain, and she had to be certain before she dared be anything else. Her father had been Josiah Nash, apothecary, of a narrow tallow-lit shop on the side in Newcastle, where the colliers came up the river black to the waterline, and the whole city smelled of coal and the sea. He taught her before she could read, not her letters first, but the drawers of his cabinet, the hartshorn, the syrup of poppies, the laudanum weighed to the single grain, and behind a little door with a skull scratched into the wood by some dead apprentice, the ratsbane, the white arsenic, the rat-catcher's friend. A thing that heals and a thing that kills are very often the same thing, he told her, holding the bottle to the candle so the powder glowed. They are parted only by the weight of the dose. Learn the weight. And he taught her the other thing, the thing that ruined him. He would lay his broad hand flat on a fevered chest and go still, listening the way other men listen to music. The body never lies, Verity. Only the people around it do. She had watched him prove it. When the merchant Fenwick died, fat, gouty, wealthy Fenwick, whose young second wife wept so beautifully at the inquest that grown men looked away. It was Josiah Nash who rose and said the plain word aloud, arsenic. He named the pale nails, the garlic breath, the burning no natural fever brings. He was right, and every man in that room knew in his bones he was right. And the Fenwick money closed over him without a single raised voice, the way the tide closes over a stone. Custom fell away. His license was questioned by men who owed the widow favors. Within 2 winters the shop was sold from under him, and Josiah Nash was a shaking, apologetic ghost in a rented attic. And the last thing he ever said to his daughter was, "I should have held my tongue, child." A wise man holds his tongue. She had held hers ever since. Through every low and narrowing place a woman with no money and no reference can fall into, until at last only one house in England would take her. A half-ruined hall on the edge of the German Ocean, whose master was dying and whose people could get nobody better than a nameless nurse of 25, provided she did not tell them whose daughter she was. She had given her name as Nash and let them take it for a common one. That was the single lie she had allowed herself in 15 honest years. She did not yet know what it would come to cost her. Toward midnight, the door opened without a knock, and Mrs. Harlow came in. And in her 2 hands, she carried a silver cup that gathered the firelight and held it like something alive. "His lordship's posset," she said. "Spiced wine, an egg, a little cream. I have made it with my own hands every night these 20 years. He'll take it from no other." She said it almost fondly. It was a beautiful thing, that cup, chased about the rim with ivy, and on its swell a pair of initials worn nearly smooth. A. Verity watched Mrs. Harlow cross to the bed and lift the old man's head with a gentleness that looked, in the low red light, very nearly like love. Watched her coax the warm wine between his cracked lips a little at a time, patient, murmuring. Watched him drink it down. Watched the small, private, satisfied stillness settle over that iron face as the empty cup came away. 20 years, Verity thought. No, not 20 years. No man breathes 20 years with what I smelled tonight in his lungs. Whatever this was, it was new. New enough that a strong old man was still, night by night, being taken to pieces. She said nothing. But when Mrs. Harlow had gone, and the cup with her, Verity sat a long while looking at the closed door, and something in her, some buried and disobedient thing she had thought 15 years had killed, turned over in its sleep and began, very slowly, to wake. By the third day, the Earl had settled on a strategy for driving her out. And Verity, watching, understood it was the way he had always fought. Wound first, from a distance, before you can be wounded yourself. He was cruel with the precision of a man who has been powerful his whole life and has nothing left to be powerful over but the one soul nearest him. He called her clumsy when she was gentle and slow when she was quick. He told her the beef tea tasted of dishwater, and then, an hour later, wept with rage that she had let it go cold. Once, when she had held him through a griping spasm that left him gray and clawing at the sheet, he waited until his breath came back and told her distinctly that he could smell the poorhouse on her hands. On the 5th morning, he knocked the bowl from her fingers on purpose. She watched him do it, the deliberate sweep of the wasted arm, and the hot gruel went across the floor and the hem of her one good gown. Clumsy, he said, and waited for tears or temper or the flight of the last 3 before her. Verity looked at the mess and at him, and then knelt and cleaned it, unhurried, and rose and said only, "I'll make more. It's better fresh in any case." Something crossed his ruined face that might, in a younger man, have been shame. He ate the second bowl to the bottom and did not knock a thing from her hands again. She brought him broth he would not drink and read to him from books he pretended not to hear. And she did not weep, and she did not pack her box. And slowly, without either of them naming it, the wounding began to lose its edge on her, the way a blade loses its edge on stone. On the 4th night, his voice came at her out of the dark, without warning. "Why do you never answer me back?" "Would it help you to be well?" she said, not looking up from her mending. "If I did." He was quiet. The fire ticked and settled. "My son used to answer me back," he said at last, and all the cruelty had drained out and left only the hollow where it had lived. "Gervais, temper like a struck flint, got it from me. We quarreled over a marriage I forbade, and I told him he was no son of mine, and he took me at my word and went, and I never saw his living face again. 5 years dead now, of a fever, in a country I never saw." A long, ragged breath. "And his boy, my grandson, my own blood, the last of us, never wrote me a line. Not when his father died, not after, not once. So you see, girl, I know something of being left. Do not imagine you came here to teach me anything about it." Verity sat very still and let the ashes of it settle. She was learning this house the way her father taught her to learn a body, by watching what it flinched from, what it guarded, what it could not bear to have touched. And here it was in the dark. An old man dying inside the belief that his own blood had abandoned him, and a grandson somewhere in the world who had never come. She began quietly to do the only useful thing she knew how to do. She could not accuse, she did not dare, and could not have proved a word. But she could govern the food. She was his nurse. It was her plain right. She turned back the rich made dishes that came up from the kitchen. She made his gruel herself, at the sick-room fire, in a pan she scoured with her own hands, and gave it to him from her own spoon. And within a week, so slightly at first, she mistrusted her own hope. The Earl of Farn began, against every expectation in that house, to mend. The garlic thinned from his breath. He kept his broth down and asked for more. One iron gray afternoon, he asked her to draw back the curtain and lay a long while looking out at the white, unbroken moor, at a single blackbird crossing it, as though he had not truly expected to see the world again. She should have been glad, and could not be, because she had done a thing her father would have called an experiment. Change one thing only, and watch the body answer. And the body had answered her plainly and without mercy. It was not the disease eating this man alive. It was the house. She looked up from the window and found Mrs. Harlow in the doorway, with the empty cup cradled in both hands, watching the Earl watch his own moor come back to him. And on the housekeeper's iron face was an expression Verity could not name, and never afterward forgot. The heir came on the last day of November, unannounced, out of a storm off the sea. Verity heard it rise through the house before she understood it. Raised voices in the hall, the stamp of a hard-ridden horse, Mrs. Harlow's keys ringing sharp as she hurried down. Then a man's boots on the great stair, two at a stride, angry, and the sick-room door flung open without a knock. A young man stood in it, snow melting dark on the shoulders of his greatcoat, his face weathered and travel-hard, and, she saw with a small shock, very like the portrait turned to the wall on the landing. "Which of you is the nurse?" he said, his eyes going from her to the old man and back. "And which of you is robbing my grandfather while he dies?" So, thought Verity, and something in her went quiet and watchful. This is the boy who never wrote. "Rafe." The old man's voice broke clean across the name. He had half risen, his wasted hands shook against the coverlet. For one unguarded instant, something naked and young showed in his ruined face, and then he remembered his grievance and dragged it back around him like a coat. "You come now." 5 years of silence, and you come now, to see is there anything left worth the journey? "I came," the young man said, low and unsteady, "because a lawyer wrote to tell me you were dying. It is the first word I have had of you in 5 years." He turned that hard gray stare, his grandfather's stare exactly, on Verity. "And I find a strange woman, with her hand in the whole household. Mrs. Harlow tells me the plate is short a snuff-box since October, and the late Countess's garnet brooch is gone from its case, and that his lordship fails and rallies like a tide since this one came. And now I am told she gave a false name at the door." He took a step toward her. "Nash is not your name, is it?" Verity felt the ground she stood on tilt. It was true. She had given only her surname and let them think it common. It was true a valuable was missing. It was true the Earl rose and fell, and true she could not, dared not, explain why. Every separate fact was innocent, and set in a row like that, in this man's grieving and exhausted hand, they made a rope. "Nash is my name," she said. "I gave you no other." "You gave us nothing," he said, "which is its own kind of lie." "She has done me good," the Earl growled, and it silenced them both. "There, said once, and I'll not say it twice. More good in 3 weeks than Mallory did in 3 months with his lancet. Now leave off, the pair of you, circling my bed like dogs about a fallen deer." But the harm was made. That night, on the black landing, Verity heard them below. Mrs. Harlow's voice, patient, sorrowful, dropping its single drops into the young man's ear. "A woman we know nothing of. No character she'll show. And I say nothing, Master Rafe. Only, have you not marked how strangely his lordship fails and rallies since ever she came?" She heard Rafe say nothing back, but she heard him listening, the terrible attentive silence of a man being handed exactly the story he needs. I am her cover now, Verity thought, staring at the rafters, the shape she will hang it all upon. Far below, in the still room off the kitchen, a single light burned very late. She did not go down to see whose. She was too much a coward yet. But she lay awake and thought of the little door with a skull scratched into it, and of how any great house on a moor of granaries and rats keeps ratsbane by the pound and thinks nothing of it, and of how no living soul would ever dream of asking the woman with all the keys why she had need of quite so much. December closed its white fist over Barrowmere. The moor vanished. The drifts came over the low garden wall. And when the wind dropped in the small hours, the sea could be heard a mile off, grinding at the foot of the cliffs like a thing that meant, in the end, to have the whole house. Verity grew certain, and being certain, grew afraid. She had proved it past honest doubt now. On the nights the Earl was too weak to take his posset, he woke stronger. On the nights he drank it, he woke worse. The griping, the burning throat, the cold sweat at dawn. She had run it as her father would have, changing nothing but the one thing, and the one thing answered every time. One night, when Mrs. Harlow was called to a leaking roof, she had carried the full cup to the window and tipped a little of the warm wine onto the snow of the sill. In the gray morning, the snow beneath it lay oddly clean. The small, dark spot a bird had left there faded to nothing. It would prove nothing to a magistrate. It proved everything on earth to her. But she remembered Newcastle, a warm, crowded room full of well-fed men who had known her father was right and let him be destroyed anyway, because he was small and the truth was expensive and the money was large. And she was smaller than her father had ever been. A hired nurse, a woman with a missing brooch hung round her neck by rumor and a false name, and a father, if once they knew it, publicly disgraced for making this exact accusation. Who under this roof would take her word over the woman who had kept the keys for 20 years? So she did the coward's clever thing instead of the brave and ruinous one. She kept the poison from reaching him and told no one why. She sat up the whole of every night. When the posset came, she praised it, set it warm by the hearth, swore she would give it at 2 o'clock when his lordship woke. And then, when the house was still, poured it into the fire, where it hissed and flared blue for an instant, and gave the old man milk from her own store. And the Earl mended, and Mrs. Harlow, watching him mend against all her calculations, grew still and soft-footed and watchful as a cat at a hole. There was 1 hour of grace in all that hard month. The Earl, stronger now, bid her open the small drawer of his cabinet and bring out a lock of hair bound in a ribbon gone the color of weak tea. "Her hair," he said, and his voice had lost its iron. "Anne, my wife. She died the year Gervais left. I have sometimes thought I drove the boy off because losing her had made a coward of me, and it is an easier thing to send a son away in a rage than to stand and watch him grieve." His trembling hand closed round the ribbon. "You would have suited her. She could not abide a house that ran on fear, servants creeping, doors shutting soft." He looked at her out of the quiet gray sea of his eyes. "Neither, I begin to think, can you." It was the kindest thing anyone living had said to her in 15 years, and she had to turn quickly to the fire so he should not see what it did to her face. She was still turned to the fire when the door opened and Mrs. Harlow stood in it. And this time she carried no cup, only a candle. She raised it, and by its light looked at the milk jug warming on the hearth, and at the posset standing full and cold and untouched beside the bed. And her handsome iron face went through something quick and dreadful, there and gone before it smoothed itself over like water closing. "You do not give him his posset," she said very softly. "He sleeps easier without the wine," said Verity, just as softly. And for a long moment the two women looked at each other across the body of the dying man, and everything true passed between them in that single look, and not one word of it was spoken aloud. "You are a clever girl," Mrs. Harlow said at last, and made the word clever the coldest thing Verity had ever heard. But cleverness is a perilous possession in a girl with no money and no friends and no name worth speaking. She turned. The door closed as soft. Her keys rang away down the stair like small bright bells. And Verity understood, standing in the firelight, that she had just been given her one and only warning. The blow fell 3 nights later, and it fell through the wound the enemy had already found. Verity woke to a house in uproar. The Earl was convulsing, rigid, then thrashing, the sweat pouring off his gray face, his lips gone blue. She was across the room before she was awake, clearing his mouth, turning him, holding him, calling for hot water, for mustard, for anything. And in the heart of it, a cold, clear part of her understood. She has moved. She has found some road to him by day. She has put it in something I never thought to guard. Rafe came running in his shirt sleeves, Mallory after him, red-faced and useless with his lancet. And Mrs. Harlow, of course she was there, weeping the exact right measure. I did not want to say it. God is my witness. She turned her wet, believable face to Rafe. But she turns back his food, his posset, all I bring. She'll suffer no soul near him but herself. And look how he sinks. A shaking breath. And I have found who she is. Her father was Nash, the apothecary of Newcastle, broke and disgraced for poisoning a gentleman to get at his money. She came in under a false name. Softer, the knife going in easy. And the Countess's brooch, Master Rafe. I could not rest. I looked in her box tonight, while she sat with him. It is there, under the linen. Go and see. They went and saw. It was there. Verity stood in the middle of it, with the whole truth living on her tongue, and 15 years of learned terror closed round her throat like a fist. Her box had a lock. Only one other key in the house fitted, the master key on the ring at Mrs. Harlow's waist. She could have said so. She could have cried out that her father was innocent, ruined not for poisoning a man, but for saying one was poisoned. That she stood in this room now watching the same crime. That if Rafe would only look at the nails, the breath, the good nights and the bad set against that silver cup. She had watched, at 13, exactly what the world does to a small, honest person who says such things. Is it true? Rafe's voice was not steady. Your name, your father, the brooch in your box. Answer me. She looked at him. She looked at the smile Mrs. Harlow was hiding behind her sorrowing hands. For she alone stood near enough to see it begin to curve. And when everything came down to whether Verity Nash could open her mouth, she did the thing she had spent 15 years training herself to do above all others. She said nothing. Get out. Almost a whisper. You are dismissed. Gone at first light. And if I hear your name near my grandfather again, I will have you before the magistrate. He would not look at her. Mrs. Harlow, you will nurse him now, as you should have from the first. Mrs. Harlow bowed her head and covered her face. Verity, standing nearest, watched the smile finish. They put her in a cold, slope-ceiling box under the eaves to see out the night. And there, at the very floor of everything, in the last place she would have looked, Verity found the thing that turned it all. She had a chair and a candle end. She could not sit. She paced from wall to sloping wall, 3 steps and turn, and her trailing sleeve caught the corner of a chest shoved back under the eaves. An old campaign trunk, brass-cornered, the kind of thing carried home from some war and forgotten in a servant's attic for a generation. It was not locked. She lifted the lid for no better reason than that her hands needed somewhere to go that was not her own throat. And beneath a fold of yellowed linen that smelled of camphor, she found a bundle of letters bound in faded tape. Everyone directed, in the same hand, to the Right Honourable the Earl of Farn, Barrowmere Hall. Everyone unopened, not a single seal broken. And the hand, young and hard and growing harder letter by letter, and then, in the last, faltering down into something close to grief, was the same hand that had signed her dismissal 4 hours before. Rafe's letters. Years of them. She lifted them out with fingers gone cold and careful. I do not ask your forgiveness for my father, only your leave to grieve him beside you. And another. I have written 6 times and had no answer. If you wish me gone forever, tell me so in one plain line, and I will never trouble you again. And the last, barely a 12-month-old. If you are ill, grandfather, only send, and whatever lies between us, I will come. I would 10 times rather quarrel with you living than mourn you a stranger. Everyone unopened. Everyone hidden here under the camphor linen by a hand that had somehow not quite been able to burn them. Verity sat down on the cold boards with the bundle in her lap, and at last understood the whole dreadful architecture of the thing. Mrs. Harlow had not merely been poisoning the old man's body. She had been poisoning his heart alongside it, keeping the boy's letters from ever reaching him. So the Earl would go to his grave, believing his last blood had abandoned him. So his bitterness would set hard as mortar into a will that struck the grandson out and provided handsomely for a faithful housekeeper. Isolation and arsenic working hand in hand. And when the heir came north anyway, unlooked for, she had not lost her head. She had simply picked him up and made a weapon of him. She kept them, Verity thought, staring at the unbroken seals. She had only to burn them, and never did. Because she is a woman who has spent her whole life hoarding the proofs of what she is owed. Every unthanked year, every unpaid service, she keeps records. It is the shape of her soul. And there it was, the very thought her father would have had, arriving in her like an inheritance. A woman who keeps her grievances so carefully has kept her accounts as carefully. Every shilling laid out for this house, including, entered plainly in her own hand and never once questioned, the ratsbane, by the pound. She got to her feet. Her hands had stopped shaking and this time did not begin again. And she knew, with the flat calm that comes only when fear has burned all the way to its floor and found nothing underneath, that she was done at last with being silent. Her father had held his tongue at the end and died ashamed of it. And the shame had helped to kill him. She would not carry that shame into the ground. She would speak, but this time she would speak the way the enemy herself had taught her. Not with a naked word a rich house could bury, but with the proof held fast in her own 2 hands. She did not go to Rafe with words alone. Words alone had failed her father. She went to him an hour before the winter, dawn, and without a syllable, put the letters in his hands, he would have thrown her bodily from the room. He got as far as drawing breath to do it, and then his eye fell on his own hand, upon the topmost letter, on the word grandfather in his own younger, angrier script, on the seal that had never in 5 years been broken, and everything else went out of his face at once, like a candle pinched between 2 fingers. She stood by the door and watched him read. Watched a proud, hard, grieving man come quietly to pieces, 1 letter at a time. I have written 6 times. I would rather quarrel with you living. When he reached the last, his hand was pressed wide across his mouth. He never had them, Verity said into that silence. Not one. He has believed these 5 years that you left him to die alone. He told me so himself the second night I was here, said it to the ceiling in the dark, and it was the truest grief I ever heard from a living man. Someone under this roof has kept you 2 apart on purpose. The same someone who nurses him now. The same someone who found a brooch in a locked box that only her own key would open. Why? Rafe said. The word came out raw. Why would she? Because a bitter man makes a bitter will, said Verity, and a will made in the belief that you had cast him off would never have your name in it. She has kept him poor in love, and she made herself say it now, out loud at last, the very word that had broken her father, and found that saying it did not break her. And she has been poisoning his body besides. Ratsbane, in the posset, every night these many weeks, the pale bands on his nails, the garlic on his breath, the way he mends when he does not drink it and sinks when he does. I knew it the first hour I came. I was too great a coward to say it, because I have seen what the world does to those who do. I am not a coward any longer. And she told him then, all of it, her father, Newcastle, Fenwick and the weeping widow and the tide of money that closed over an honest man. The name given not out of guile, but out of shame. The nights she had emptied the silver cup into the fire and given the old man milk from her own hand. And she watched the things she needed most in the world begin, slowly, to happen behind his reddened eyes. She watched him believe her, and behind the belief, dawning, a horror at himself she knew would not leave him for a long while, and did not try to spare him. If she bought the poison, Verity said, she entered it in the household accounts. She enters everything. Her whole life is a ledger of what she is owed. Find the accounts, and then we will set the cup itself to catch her, for she will make it again tonight, exactly as she has for 20 years, because it has never once entered her head that any creature in this house would dare to stop her. Rafe went down to find the account books. He was gone a long time. When he came back up the stair, his face was the gray-white of the snow beyond the windows, and in his hand he carried a great leather ledger, fallen open to a column in Mrs. Harlowe's neat, faithful, unhesitating hand. Ratsbane for the granaries, entered over and over, in quantities that would have poisoned every rat in Northumberland 3 times over, each purchase dated. Verity saw when she bent close, to within a day or 2 of one of the old man's worst nights. God forgive me, Rafe said. He was not speaking to her. He was looking at the closed door of the sick room, where his grandfather lay this moment in the care of the woman who had been murdering him by inches for a season. I turned you into the snow, and I gave him to her. Then let us take him back, said Verity. They did not go at her with shouting and seized wrists. Verity would not have it. Let the truth do the work, she said, and let her own hand spring the trap. She has built the whole of her life. Let it be the thing that falls on her. That evening, the household was gathered in the great hall, Rafe had summoned every soul in it. Mallory besides, affronted and mystified, and old Prewitt the butler, whose loyalty had for weeks been quietly migrating toward the nurse, and even the magistrate from the market town 8 miles off, brought through the drifts on an errand not yet explained. Candles burned the length of the long table. The fire threw the ancestors into red and shifting motion. And into the midst of it, at the accustomed hour, on the accustomed silent feet, came Mrs. Harlow with the silver cup in both her hands, warm, spiced, gently steaming, made for the Earl exactly as it had been made every night for 20 years. "His lordship's posset," she said. And under the servant's meekness ran the faintest bright thread of triumph. For the nurse was cast into the snow, and the air was hers, and the old man was failing on her schedule, and she believed, with reason, that she had won. "Set it down," said Rafe. She set it on the long table, and the ivy-chased silver caught the candlelight and held it. And Rafe, who had rehearsed no speech, said only the plain truth, set it level and clear before witnesses, the way Verity's father had once cried it out and been destroyed for it, 20 years and 200 miles too late. "Mrs. Harlow, before all these witnesses, will you drink my grandfather's posset yourself tonight and pledge his health in it?" The great hall went entirely still. For a moment, Mrs. Harlow did the thing she had always done when a thing threatened her. She reached for command. She drew herself up, and her voice came out with 20 years of authority behind it, the voice that had turned off servants and cowed tradesmen and ordered this house since before the youngest maid was born. "This is beneath answering. Prewitt, show the magistrate to the fire. He is chilled through. Nell, take the cup. It grows cold." And for the length of a heartbeat, the old habit almost held. Nell's hand twitched toward the tray. Then the girl looked to the still-room door, where the thin gray figure of the nurse stood quiet, and to Prewitt, who had not stirred, and let her hand fall back to her side. No one went to the fire. No one took the cup. The command went out into the great cold room and found, for the first time in 20 years, nothing at all to land on. And Mrs. Harlow heard the silence for what it was, and understood what it meant, and something behind her eyes began, very quietly, to come apart. Verity watched the housekeeper's face, and saw a whole hard life pass across it in the space of a breath. The young widow left with less than nothing, coverture having swept her dead husband's debts over her head like a gray sea, no jointure settled, no portion saved, no place in the world but what she could seize and hold by her wits. The 20 years of running a great cold house, ably, faithfully, for a man who never once thought to set her security down in writing. The fear, sharpening year on year like a blade on a stone, of being turned out at last into the parish with nothing, the way a woman without fortune could be turned out at a single word. And did she not know it? Verity, who had been small and frightened her whole life too, felt a thing move in her that was almost pity. Almost. "I will not be so insulted," Mrs. Harlow said. Her voice held level. Her hand, reaching to sweep the cup away untasted, did not. "This is that creature's poison poured in your ear, Master Rafe. The poisoner's daughter that lied her way in among us, that stole the brooch." "The brooch was in a locked box," Rafe said, "and your key is the only other that opens it. The accounts—" He laid the great ledger open on the table beside the steaming cup. "Are in your own hand, not hers. The rat's bane is in your hand. And these—" He set the bundle of unopened letters down beside the ledger, the tape still binding them. my grandfather never received in 5 years, and they were hid in your keeping. I do not need her word against you, madam. I have your own, in ink, for 20 years. His voice cracked, and he mastered it. You need only lift the cup and drink. For one terrible moment, she meant to. Verity saw her decided, saw the cold arithmetic run behind the gray eyes, the same arithmetic that had weighed out a killing dose night after night. That the powder took hours, not moments, to show. That if she drank and lived, they could prove nothing after all. Her hand closed round the ivy-chased silver. She lifted it. The wine trembled at the rim. The whole hall leaned toward her without a foot moving. She raised the cup as far as her breastbone, and there it stopped, and would rise no further. Because a body that has spent a whole season measuring poison into that very vessel cannot in the end be made to carry it to its own mouth. The hand knew what the will would not own. Slowly, the cup came down and set itself on the table, and she did not let go of it, as though it were the last thing in the world that was still hers. And there it was, the thing Verity's father had promised her all her life the body would show. If only one had eyes to see and courage to look. Mrs. Harlow looked down at the cup she had made 1,000 times, and every soul in that hall watched her not drink from it. She looked at the ledger in her own faithful hand. She looked at the letters she had been too proud, too much the lifelong hoarder of her own bright grievances, ever to feed to the fire. She had raised the whole tall defense of her innocence upon her own meticulous, unthanked, undeniable competence. And it was that same competence, in the end, that pulled the roof down on her. Every record she had ever kept to prove the world was in her debt now rose up together and named her aloud. She did not confess it in words. She simply sat down all at once, as though the strings that held her upright had been cut through, and put her face in her 2 hands, and the magistrate stepped quietly forward, and the thing was done. She fell exactly as Verity had known from the first that she must. Not through any punishment the plot contrived to drop on her, but through the patient design of her own careful, grasping, frightened life. Upstairs, in the great bed built for a giant, the Earl of Farn took warm milk from Verity's steady hand, and slept the night through without griping for the first time in a season, and woke at the gray coming of the dawn no worse. The morning after the magistrate took Mrs. Harlow away, the fishmonger's cart came up the drive through the melting snow, and the whole question of who now ruled at Barrowmere was settled in the space of a minute, in the kitchen passage, without anyone meaning to settle it. The cook stood twisting her apron. There was no housekeeper. There was no order given. The man wanted to know whether to leave the usual, and who would pay him, and who would answer for the account. And the cook, and the 2 maids, and the boy at the door all turned at the same moment, not to Rafe, who stood there the new Earl in all but the burying of the old one, but to the thin woman in gray by the still-room door, the nurse they had watched all winter. "Miss Nash," the cook said, "what's to be done?" Verity felt the whole passage waiting on her. It would have been easy and safe, and like her whole life until that winter, to say ask his lordship. She looked at Rafe. Rafe looked back at her and, deliberately, said nothing at all. And by saying nothing, gave the house to her a second time. "Leave the usual," Verity told the fishmonger. "And the soul, if it's good. The account will be paid Friday. Nell, write it in the book, and bring the book to me after." "Yes, miss," said Nell, and went to find the book, and that was all. and it was everything. It happened after that, the way true things happen, not by anyone deciding, but by everyone knowing. Old Prewitt brought her the great ring of household keys himself that same afternoon, laid it in her 2 hands, and closed her fingers over it before she could refuse. They hung at the wrong waist 20 years, was all he said. When a tradesman came, it was Miss Nash he asked for. When a maid did not know a thing, it was Miss Nash she went to. By the time the snow slumped gray along the tops of the garden walls, there was not a living soul beneath that wide slate roof who did not, in the plainest sense of the words, answer to her. Not because she had grasped at it, as another woman had grasped and been ruined, but because she had earned it, which is the only way authority is ever truly kept. The Earl did not die. He had been too long and too deeply poisoned to become again wholly the man he was. His hands would tremble to the end of his days, and the walk to his own window stayed a morning's labor. But the years the ratsbane had been stealing came back to him one by one, and he spent them, and knew that he spent them. He made his provision, and this time in writing, and had it witnessed. The great house, the ancient title, the black coal beneath the moor, that was the whole source of the family's wealth, went as the law and the entail required to Rafe, and could have gone nowhere else, whatever any bitter will might once have tried to say. But there was money besides. That was the old man's own to give, and a snug stone freehold on the high ground above the sea. And both came to Verity, so that never again he told her, holding her hand in both his trembling ones, would she be a woman any house on earth could turn out at a word. She wept when he told her, and for once was not ashamed to be seen. Rafe did not sweep her into his arms and call the story finished. He knew better, and so did she. He had believed the worst of her on a stranger's word. He had handed his own grandfather to a murderess and thrown the one honest woman in the house into the cold. A thing like that is not mended with a kiss. It was mended, if at all, in small, true things. On a raw, bright morning at the turn of the year, he found her walking the cliff path in the salt wind and fell into step beside her, and neither spoke for a while. And then he said, looking out at the grinding sea and not at her, I dismissed the only person in that house who was not lying to me. I will be a long time forgiving myself that. I do not ask you to hurry it. He paused. I ask only leave to walk here again tomorrow. You may walk here, Verity said, as long as you like. And found to her own surprise that she meant it, and that when he learned at last to answer her back, quick and warm, the way his grandfather had spent 5 bitter years wishing his own lost son still would. She did not mind it in the least. On a blue, hard morning some weeks after, she stood in the still room she had made her own, weighing out a powder to the single grain the way her father had taught her before she could read. And the old Earl came slowly to the door on his grandson's arm to watch her at her work. My wife, he said, looking about the warm, clean, orderly room, and at the young woman who had made his whole great house so, could not abide a house that ran on fear. You have given me back a house that Anne would have known for her own. Verity thought then of her father, of Josiah Nash, apothecary, who had said the one true word aloud in a crowded room and been broken and beggared and buried for it, and had died believing to the last that a wise man holds his tongue. She thought of what he had set his broad, warm hand on her shoulder and taught her at the very beginning of everything, in a coal-smelling shop by a brown northern river. The body never lies, Verity. Only the people around it do. She had not held her tongue. And this time, at long last, after 15 years and a whole hard winter, the one who told the truth had been believed. Outside, far below the high windows, the sea went on grinding at the foot of the cliffs, patient as ever. But the house above it stood warm and safe and unafraid, and the clean winter light lay unbroken across the softening snow. And the whole of Barrowmere went about its ordered business under her steady, unhurried, and wholly trusted hand.